And now I'll hand it over to Michael.
We call this piece of art Man Fantasy for obvious reasons.
They gave me long hair in here, so it's kind of a dream of mine.
But they left the glasses on.
They left, yeah, well.
I think they look fierce.
I do look fierce, thank you. Anyway, so thus far everybody's been talking about creating a world, but that's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something slightly different, and we're switching gears a little bit. We're talking about destroying the world. Kind of like that, right? That's what the Iron Golem did. Not quite like that. I'm talking about harvesting and a couple of the systems that go along with it. So this is a picture that you might recognize from the debut that they're discussing harvesting. So what does harvesting have to do with a destructible world and creating a world? In fact, it has to do a lot with it, right? We talk about how destruction changes the systems that we create. We talk about it all the time, but this is actually one instance where it does actually change quite a bit. It doesn't change absolutely everything, so you'll recognize quite a few things, but it does change a lot, and so I'll talk about some of the differences. One of the first things is this. Can anybody point out a harvesting NPC? Not you. You're not allowed to. There are no harvesting NPCs. We actually got rid of them, right? Because we don't need them. Our world is actually made of resources, right? So you don't run around and look at a terrain and then see a node sticking up that looks like a sore thumb. The world is made of resources, and that allows us to have a more organic approach to the way we build the world. Which kind of goes into our natural resource locations, right? Things are where you expect them to be, and because of the tier system that we have, we don't have to say, hey, in the level 5 zone, you're going to find copper. You find copper where you think copper might be, which is pretty cool. Here's the map you've seen of a sample continent, and on this continent, we'll do a little quiz. On this continent, where do you think you can find rocks? You know? Do you guys? On the mountains, right? It's pretty cool. Underwater, sure, mountains underwater. You find resources, where you think they might be, and you guys obviously know this sort of information already. Just coming into the game, these things, feel natural. I like this particular slide. Dirt can be found pretty much anywhere. It was fun explaining this one to the artist when we were talking about it. They're like, "You want me to highlight the whole map?" It's like, "Yeah, that would be great." Anyway, when you harvest, it destroys the world for a temporary amount of time. And when you're harvesting dirt or whatever it is, you're going about and destroying things, and then it heals up and will move some of the resources that you've harvested. But one important thing I want to note is, even though you come into the game knowing a lot of these things and where a lot of the things are going to happen, we still have game-specific knowledge. So we still want you to explore. And this is an example of where you might find mithril, right? Mithril is found deep within the mountains, up north. And that's something that you'll have to discover as you play the game. You're not just going to come into the game knowing that.
Don't dig too deep, though.
Don't dig too deep, yes. It's very scary. Awesome. And the next point is, our world doesn't just consist of the top layer, right? We've talked about this tiered concept, and that applies to harvesting as well. You're going to be surface mining, and you're also going to be harvesting, deep beneath the earth, as Jeff, segued into. So don't forget that. Next, I want to talk to you guys about tools. So tools is something that we're going to be making interesting. It's not just, we'll have things like pickaxes, obviously, but we want to expand tools to make the actual process of harvesting more exciting, right? And we'll get into more of that later. I just want to let you guys know right now that there'll be some basic harvesting, and there'll also be some more interesting and more specialized harvesting, we'll call it. And you can extrapolate what that means. So we want to use harvesting as a method to encourage exploration, right? Because it's pretty important. So we'll go back to our mithril example. As you guys know so far, I'm fond of examples, and I use them a lot. Say I'm cruising around in the snow-capped mountains, and I'm harvesting mithril and lumber and stone and all the things that go there. I get enough mithril to make my first mithril pickaxe, and I'm so proud of it. As I'm going through here, I noticed that there's an active volcano. Can you guys see the volcano on there? It's right there. You see this volcano and you're like, all right, that looks like a really cool area. You look at your pickaxe and it says you can harvest obsidian on it. So you're like, all right, you put 2 and 2 together and you cruise over to the volcano. And as you're there, you're harvesting obsidian for that sweet obsidian couch you want to make. You're finding treasure and you're having new experiences. And we have set up the world in such a way that these exploration moments happen fairly frequently, and harvesting is just one way that we move you towards that. So now you know quite a bit about harvesting, or not quite a bit, but a decent amount about harvesting. I want to tell you about crafting, what you can do with your resources. Yeah. So first off, everybody is a crafter, right? Landmark is a frontier game, and on the frontier, everybody needs skills to survive, essentially. If you want something, you can go out and get resources and you make it, right? You want a bed, go make a bed. If you want an enchanted tiki statue or whatever, you can go out and do something like that. So everyone is a crafter, and we're going to make the system easy to use and accessible. I worry that when I say easy to use and accessible, people are going to worry that there's nothing out there for the hardcore guy. That's not the case at all, actually. It's a deep system where we can do quite a few things, and I want you guys to know that. The next point is players will be making most of the items. We have drops and we have treasures in the world, but we want you guys to go out there and make things, right? We want you to encourage commerce and to, hey, I explored this area and found some really cool resources. I went back and I made that, made that item. Do you want that, or do you want to trade, or whatever it is? And so we want you guys to go out and create most of these items. And in fact, we allow you to make quite a few items. Here's an example of some of the things some elven items, and here are some Karen things. And this is just a small example of some of the items that you might be able to make. Because the way I feel about it is, we want to provide enough things for you to find and to be able to craft, to keep kind of a record of where you've been and what you've done. I know I collect things. I go to conventions and do all that kind of stuff, and I get my action figure or whatever it is, and I set it on the on my shelf, where it belongs, right? And you can look at all of those things I have, and it's a record of what I've done and where I've been, and we want that experience to be the case here as well. But we also realize this animation is sweet, by the way. We realize that you can thank Jake for that. He's he'll be here for a while.
It'll be at least that detailed in the game.
Yes, yeah, that's the process. But anyway, we realize there's some of you guys that might be less sentimental, and you can go out and you can harvest the items that you've found and you've created, because they're also made of resources, right? If I set something on the counter, I bash it. It becomes the resources that it's created from.
I'll remind Michael of that when I melt down his action figures.
Thanks. That's right. Jeff's not invited to my house. Anyway, I would love to share more information on crafting with you. That's what we have so far. We want to give you a brief overview, but unfortunately, we will have to do that later. We'll be revealing more information over time, and Jake has more for you on things you can do with resources.
Yeah, I'm Jake Sones. I'm a senior designer working mostly on Landmark and building inside of EverQuest Next. Terry told me I gotta go fast, so I'm gonna try and hit all the points. No? I don't have to go fast? Oh, I have 5 minutes. Oh, man. All right. So Michael went over how you can harvest stuff and how you can use it for crafting. This section, I'm gonna talk about what you can do with building. So outside of your plot, you're mostly gonna be building for navigation purposes. Since our world is so destructible, you're going to get trapped unless you can build your way out of the holes that you're digging. So that world will regenerate and it will get back to its natural state, so it's not just going to be a huge crater and wasteland. But while you're building outside of the plot, you're not going to be using all the same tools that you're building to make your house. There'll be a very limited tool set. You won't be smoothing terrain in the outer world, because there's not really a reason to do that. But once you're building in your plot, this is where you're going to do all the permanent building. This is where you're going to make your house, to store all your action figures. This is where you invite your friends over so everybody can do this together in a big social way. And this is where you're going to get the really powerful tools. This is where you're going to be using the same tools that we use. Everything that we use, you guys will also have access to. We had a lot of different philosophies when creating those tools, and most important among them is easy to use. We wanted to make it really clear that what's going to happen as soon as you click that confirmation button. We want to give you lots of really good feedback and lots of previews of what's going to happen. And we want that behavior to be consistent across different tools. We want those buttons to feel natural. So in this example, you're placing a block that can be rotated in many different ways, and the button bound to that is the mouse wheel. You just use the mouse wheel and it rotates. And we want that to be consistent not just across placing blocks, but placing props and when you're pasting in large things into the area. And we build on top of that. We group related functions together. So there might be, like, if you hold shift, your mouse wheel changes from rotation to doing like an offset in a specific axis. And I'm really looking forward to showing you guys how all this stuff looks eventually. But unfortunately, right now, we're not quite ready to show how it looks in-game. We also wanted to make sure that everything was really powerful. We didn't want you to have to build brick by brick by brick because that would get really boring and take a really long time to do. So we looked at a lot of different games and a lot of different mods for different games to see what types of features people ended up using. And we wanted to take those things into consideration and take into consideration the powerfulness that we get from smoothing, which is something that I haven't really seen in another voxel-based game. And we want to give you really powerful things like copy and paste, so you can build quickly and get everything moving along, so you're not stuck in tedious things. But almost as important as those other two is we want this to be fun to use. It's not an art program, it's a game. And we want it to feel that way. We want all of the tools that you're using to be in the same art style as the rest of the world. We don't want like big Maya handles or like wire frames around everything. We want it to feel like it takes place in the world that you're editing. So things don't just like appear in the world. You don't just click and they just pop in there. We're using, we introduce them with animations and sounds and particle effects. While you move things around, they'll stick to your cursor and sway back and forth. Like when you click to place it, it'll thump down and have like particle effects, like dust clouds come out of it. It'll feel like solid, like you're actually moving part of the world. But with that, we come to some debate, right? Because the more flashy you make something, you lose sight of what it is that you're actually doing. So we're definitely taking that into consideration. Oh man, I just totally messed it up. As well as with the animation, like too much of it and you're just sitting there waiting for something to happen. And we don't want to slow you down with that either. Another big debate is ease of use versus powerfulness of the tools. When you have a few features, it's really easy to pick up and understand what's going on. You can look at something like a knife and you're like, okay, I'm gonna stick the pointy end in the bad guy, and that's all it does, and it does that really well. And when we start giving you more features, you're getting more power, but then you start to add levels of complication that can lead to confusion. Like, I don't really remember where the saw is, but I want to try and figure out how to get there. And we don't want to overburden you with too much of this stuff. So balancing these two and finding a happy medium requires a lot of innovation. Coming up with something weird and crazy. And that's really what we're trying to do with EverQuest Next and Landmark is find new and innovative ways to combine things, to give you tools that you haven't seen before but make sense. Just like a gunblade, totally makes sense. And that's what we're hoping to do. So, thanks.
All right. Not yet? All right, there we go. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. There's a lot we talked about in here. If you have questions, go ahead and form a line here, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Just so everybody knows, we do have a full Q&A hour after this. We'll take about a 5-minute break. And so if we don't get to you this time, come back and we'll answer your questions then.
So inventory space, I'm just wondering if we're going to have decent sized stacks or if we're going to be making tons of little trips to some big box that we're dropping things in, or how we're going to organize things?
I think you can expect to have decent size inventory. I mean, it's going to be important to have your own claim, to have a place you can go back and store your stuff. But we don't necessarily envision you, as fun as it is to move through the world, it's not necessarily fun to go back and forth over the same spot over and over and over and over and over again.
Right.
Fun question. I'm from Nagafen. So I see that gravity actually seems to do something in this game. Can I dig under somebody's plot and collapse their plot?
It's not very nice.
Can you repeat it a little bit? I didn't catch the end.
Well, I can answer this one, Greg. That's okay. The answer is we want to make the game as interesting and intuitive as possible, but there will be some limitations. So when I was the technical director talking about some of these things, I said no to that question. Steve may have a different answer. We just don't know right now, or at least Steve's not willing to tell me what the answer is.
To Terry's credit, it was one of the very few things that he said no about.
So long as you bought him dinner first.
Hey, thanks, guys. Along the line of gravity, as far as the Forge Light engine, can we expect the system Rex to be similar to PlanetSide 2? And would having like an SLI setup and/or like multi-threaded processor be advantageous? That's a lot of support that's lacking in online games. Is multi-threaded. So.
Well, it's definitely something. I mean, we're obviously trying to optimize the engine as much as possible to take use of all those technologies out there. It's a little too early for us to really start talking about min specs yet. Optimization is something that is ongoing, but it's something that we have to continue to focus on so that we can get it running as fast as possible on all machines. But yeah, we're looking at every opportunity. We're working closely with the NVIDIA guys, and we're doing everything we can to make this thing run fast for everybody. So yeah, we're going to try to take advantage of all the technologies possible.
We want a beautiful game that has as great a longevity as humanly possible, but ultimately, we talked earlier about critical mass and accessibility. We can't have a living, vibrant, breathing, massively multiplayer game that everyone can play in unless everyone can play in it, or as many people as humanly possible.
So you're talking about the ability to go out and harvest resources in the world. I'm just having difficulty wrapping my head around the notion of setting 20 people loose in Antarctica, for example, and not having it look like the surface of the moon in about 20 to 30 minutes. Can you help paint a picture in my head? What would happen then? How does the world look after you set those 20 people loose? What's happening in the world? What's happening with the voxels? What's happening with the terrain? That kind of stuff.
I think that when the world starts to heal itself, we want to support that to make it feel as natural as possible. So you could envision particle effects to support that. Maybe the land is filling in. There's audio to support that.
So the world heals itself already. We currently set the time limit at 5 minutes. But I think we have a pretty clear path for how the world will regenerate itself after people go through it. We'll be talking about it a lot more in the future, but I think you'll be entirely satisfied with our approach. The world won't end up looking like Swiss cheese in the long term. I realize I'm just saying that, but we'll prove it to you in the months to come.
For the players most willing to submit to self-hating things like an open world PvP server, would it be possible to mine rare resources from player-made objects? Whether that be somebody gets ambushed, you take their wonderfully made sword and smash it to bits and take the resources, or better yet, you find their nice looking house and you smash it to bits and you start taking pieces of their walls and their whatever they've made and make it into your own.
That is a spectacular question. We aren't talking about PvP, but for example, that's the sort of thing that I would expect a designer to be talking about. Because as you start looking into the mechanics of the world that we've talked about, that is one of the very first things that somebody who's interested in PvP starts to bring up. Like, can I go blow up that guy's castle? And when I blow up his obsidian couch, do I get to run away with the obsidian?
So comfortable.
Well, and to answer that in a slightly different way, we're going to have an extremely robust permission system. So you will have the ability to control in Landmark what other people can do with your things. So if you don't want anybody to be able to come in and manipulate it, you can choose to do that. If you want people to be able to do it, you can turn the permissions on so that anybody can come along and blow it up. And so that way you can, there's the ability to create the experiences that you want to in the world.
I was wondering, while harvesting, is there going to be any risks or death or anything along those lines?
So we're not really talking about the death stuff right now, but there's certainly risks. So when we talk about harvesting obsidian, there's lava, and lava is dangerous. There are certainly areas you can get into, and even itemization options that allow you to circumvent some of those dangers as well. So it's when we begin to discuss it more, you'll see what I'm talking about. But there's definitely risk.
Yep. Expect to hear a lot
Guaranteed.
more on that subject.
Yep.
It seems like in terms of creating art assets, you've just completely reinvented the wheel in terms of how you would have created an MMO or created art assets for an MMOs from say 5 years ago. Do you find that it now, with the easier tools, are you able to have basically more throughput, like 10 artists can create more content in a given amount of time that they would have been able to do 5 years ago with the previous versions of your tools?
That is absolutely our goal, and we are starting to reap some of the rewards of that. We also have tech artists on the team that their whole job is just to figure that stuff out so that the artists can dedicate themselves to being creative more than trying to refit armor sets and all of the more tedious tasks.
Yeah, a big part of my day is going and talking to the artists and being like, what's frustrating you, what's easy, like how can we make this better? And that's definitely our goal, is to make everything as smooth and as quick as possible.
What's the best way for me to satisfy my need to grief other players?
It's a personal question.
Well, it's interesting that one of the things, I'm not going to be able to answer your question because I don't know in particularly which way you want to grief players. But it's funny because this world opens up entirely new ways and new problems and new things that we need to solve to give players either a way to or a way to protect against griefing. So I think that we will be surprised by the ways in which players decide to grief other people, and you guys will be surprised by some of the things that we've thought of ahead of time and we've built in systems to facilitate or limit.
And I think we've got a pretty good plan for harnessing the joy of griefing. You'll enjoy it. The answer to your question is, what you should do is you should listen closely to announcements to come over the course of the next couple of months, because I think you'll get a big kick out of some of them.
So you mentioned creating objects, like with crafting, and placing them in your home or whatever you're constructing. Like in EQ2, you can scale an object up and down. Do you have to have more resources to be able to scale? Can you scale an object up and down?
Yes, you can right now.
Does it cost more resources?
If you were building something that was larger, in all likelihood, it would cost more resources.
So there's actually two different systems at play here. One is building with voxels, and one is placing props. So we do allow some scaling of voxels, and that does cost different resources because each voxel costs a resource. As far as props, we do have scaling in right now, and the creation of that prop requires a set amount.
Exactly what I wanted to hear.
Cool.
I understand this might be difficult to answer due to the different layers of the game, but how big can we expect EverQuest next to be?
The biggest.
Very large.
Do we have a technical answer? There are limits.
We haven't defined the limits yet. We haven't reached the limits of what we're able to do. We've been able to create the things that we want to inside of the system, and there are technical limits. We just haven't reached them yet.
Yeah, we're building the system to scale with more hardware. More hardware, more processes should scale the world larger and larger. We're not to the point where we're testing yet to see how big we can get, but that is definitely something we're keeping in mind. We want to be able to open new contents and hopefully be able to just scale it through more hardware and more processes.
Yeah. And
One
in
other
a game
thing.
where export. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, not at all. One other thing to consider, though. Every game world that you've ever played in the past has generally been laid out flat on this. Every one of our game worlds is actually a volume of some sort or another. So while you've got the surface to play on, you also have the volume underneath, or the volume above, and or the volume underneath and above, right? So that'll effectively change the face of adventuring and exploring in fairly significant ways, where it's no longer about the the square footage of Antonica.
Sorry. So I assume that each of these voxels has like a material assigned to it. Does that material have, say, mass or like hardiness? So like if you have a wall, it's more difficult to blow up than, say, a wall of dirt. And in the mass respect, if you blow up that wall of stone, does it have more of a effect when it, say, hits the ground, like visually and audible? What's the word? Orally, okay. I didn't know. It sounds like it's talking, a talking wall. But say you blow up the brick wall and it just sounds heavier when the particles hit the ground compared to, say, the dirt wall.
Want to answer that one, Rose?
Well, it's absolutely our plan to have materials have properties that have audio attached to them, if possible.
And different physical strengths. So in Michael's example earlier, he talks about a mithril pick. The reason why a mithril pick is significant to Terry, who's adventuring in the world, is that literally opens up more world to Terry. He can dig deeper. Why? Because the granite that he had previously discovered, he couldn't actually beat through it with his iron pick. It says right on the mithril pick that it can mine a certain type of stone. He now realizes that his horizons have expanded. It's not just an issue of walking necessarily to the next zone or continent. He can dig deeper now.
In addition to that, the mithril pick scales with other things as well. So it'll make it easier for you to harvest lower tier things.
My question kind of comes sort of to what Jeff was just talking about. You said walking to the next content. Will we be able to craft or create props that will allow us sort of faster movement and travel, maybe the ability to fly over the terrain and scout it out, or get yourself a mount or something like that for a fast movement?
It sounds like fun, but it's too early to say.
All right, and so that's actually amazing. We went about a minute over, but we got through all of the questions we had for this particular panel. That hasn't happened all day. We have about 5 minutes. Thank you for coming to this panel. In 5 minutes, we'll be starting the general Q&A where we can talk about everything. Well, I'm sorry, not talk about everything, but we can at least attempt to answer the questions that people have from previous panels and things like that. So take a few minutes and we'll be back.